All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Overflow Beyond the Music. I am your host, Josh McCabe. Thanks so much for hanging out. Glad you're here. Really excited about this episode today. We've got a great guest by the name of Henry Seeley. He is the lead pastor at The Belonging Co. alongside his wife, Alex Seeley. His wife, Alex, has written books. Henry's produced a ton of records. He's written a ton of songs. He was the worship leader with Planetshakers for a long, long time, which is where I first recognized his name from. And he's also the pastor at my church. So it's really an honor to have Henry on the podcast today. And he shares a lot about his journey, shares a lot about pastoring the church and what that's like. And I thought one of the things that's really interesting is just sort of the process in how he learned how to get into music production. You'll really, really enjoy that conversation. But I also want to say a huge thank you because our last episode with Paul and Hannah McClure at Bethlehem Music was one of our most downloaded episodes. It was our, I guess, most downloaded for its early release. Obviously, some of our earlier episodes probably have the most downloads because they've been out longer. But this one had the most downloads in its first week. So thank you so much to everyone who listens to this podcast faithfully. It means a lot to us. And a lot of you are finding out about it because you are subscribed. So wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it be Spotify, Apple or iTunes Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever, make sure that you are subscribed so that you know exactly when another podcast comes out. Also, check us out on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Overflow BTM is where you'll find us on there. Overflow BTM on Instagram, Overflow BTM on Facebook, Overflow BTM on Twitter. That's all our social media. Make sure that you're giving us a follow because we would love, love, love to hear from you. Now, a couple of things I want to get into quickly before we fully dive into this episode. A lot of people have been talking about Kanye West's new album, Jesus is King. I've had the chance to listen to it a few times, and I got to tell you, I like it. I think it's great. I love that people are talking about Jesus. I love that he is being authentic in his art form. You know, if we want to get really technical and go, oh, well, I'll believe it when I see it in Kanye's lifestyle. You know what? He's on a journey just like everybody else is. And if he slips and falls, if he has some days that are not his proudest moments, I hope there's a Christian community, people will have grace and stick by him because he's such a great artist, and I'm so glad that he is using his talents and his abilities and his gifts to serve the Lord. And I think that's so great. If you haven't checked out his record, Jesus is King, make sure that you check it out. You'll love it. He just did one of his Sunday services at Joel Osteen's church in Houston. It was a huge attendance. A bunch of people got saved. And this is good. This is good for the kingdom. This is good for music. This is good for Christians. This is good for the church. This is good for the mainstream, quote-unquote, secular world, whatever you want to say. I just think, I hope Kanye keeps doing it. I hope he keeps doing his thing. And I hope we keep praying for him. And I hope we keep lifting him up and supporting what he's doing with Sunday services because he is bringing the gospel to a different crowd, and a crowd that maybe has never heard of Jesus or has not been around church for a long time. So I support it. I'm all about it. I'm for it. Do not cancel Kanye. No canceling Kanye. One of the other things I saw this week that was pretty cool, though, is the CMA Awards happened in Nashville. And no, those are not the Christian Music Awards. They are the Country Music Awards. It took place at the Bridgestone Arena, and as part of the night, Dolly Parton came out and did a performance, and she brought out two guest artists with her. She did a song, a remix, of God Only Knows with For King and Country. She's on that, on the recorded version. It's nominated for a Grammy this year. She brought out Joel and Luke for King and Country. They sang the song God Only Knows, and it kind of pauses for a second. And then she brings out Zach Williams, who sang the song There Was Jesus, and Dolly Parton sings on that on the album as well. Just such a cool moment, showcasing some of the best voices in faith-based music and Christian music, or whatever you want to call it. Zach Williams for King Country. And, I just think it's awesome when we, as a faith community of musicians who have written songs that identify their faith and have impacted the church. I think it's so awesome when we get to bring that to a different world like country music and share what we're about and showcase that. And so big shout out to Dolly Parton for bringing out For King Country, bringing out Zach Williams, and showcasing some of the best in Christian music. Of course, Zach has a new album out that just came out recently called Rescue Story. And actually, just a side note, one of my favorite EPs I've been listening to lately is Zach Williams live at Harding Prison. It is so powerful, and he does a bunch of his songs, like Chainbreaker and all stuff, but he does a version of No Longer Slaves, and you need to go on YouTube. You need to check out the live video for that. It'll move you to tears. It is so powerful as you just see these prisoners being led in worship to the song No Longer Slaves, and Zach just clearly has a heart for that. There's some major Johnny Cash vibes in the videos and in the artwork, and I love it. I love it. I love it. And I really can't wait to try and get Zach on this podcast. We've already been talking with this PR team about having him on, and I know it's going to happen. We just got to find the right date. So don't you worry. We'll be having Zach on for sure. And third and finally, before we get into this week's guest, the Grammy nominations are out for this year's Grammy Awards. And I found all this information, including just all this new stuff I'm talking about. I found it on newreleasetoday.com, so make sure you check that out. They have a ton of great Christian music news, and I love how they're not even just making sure it's just this CCM or whatever. There's a ton of indie stuff on there as well, and making sure to highlight opportunities that artists who are in the faith world are interacting with artists in the country world. And this year's Grammy nominations are out, and I see nominations from Casting Crowns, for King Country, Danny Gokey, Zach Williams, Torrin Wells. For Best Contemporary Music Album, we have Crowder's I Know a Ghost, for King Country's Burn the Ships, Danny Gokey's Haven't Seen It Yet, Chris Tomlin's Holy Roar, and finally Toby Mac's The Elements. And if you don't know what Toby Mac's been going through lately, you might be living under a rock, but he recently lost his son Truett, and it's just a really heartbreaking thing for the family. For those who know Toby, I don't know Toby personally. I've had the chance to meet him a few times and always had great conversations with him. Know a lot of people that do know him, and he actually lives not far from where I live in Franklin, and there was flowers and all this stuff outside his house in memory of his son Truett. But if you get a chance to just take a moment and just pray for their family, pray for Toby McKeon or Toby Mac and his family as they just navigate what life is going to be like without his firstborn. As a father myself, I cannot even imagine the pain they're going through, and my heart just goes out to them. So please, please, please take some time and pray and think about that family, and also just support, buy his music, buy tickets. I know he's canceled a bunch of tour dates. I don't blame him. Have grace, be praying, and support Toby Mac and his ministry. All right, well, let's get into it. This is episode number 4 in season 3 of the Overflow Beyond the Music podcast. Would you please welcome to the podcast Henry Seeley from the Belonging Co. in Nashville, Tennessee. All right, well, it's my honor to bring on to the podcast Overflow Beyond the Music probably a different dynamic from the other conversations we've had, but I get to introduce him as my pastor, the guy that I gladly allowed to speak into my life along with his wife, Alex. Please welcome Henry Seeley to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you, man.
Man, I'm glad to have you, and just want to start off by saying I've talked about our church a lot on this podcast because I end up having people from our church on it a lot. Yeah. And I just want to say I'm very thankful for what you and Alex have sowed into the city of Nashville, along with a lot of other great leaders.
Yeah, we're just honored to be here and be part of, what God's doing in this city. We've been here 7 years, I guess now. Started church 5.5 years ago, and just realizing that even what we're getting to see now and build on has really just been decades and decades of people that have tilled the ground here and just dug deep wells for this city to experience, what we're experiencing in God right now. And so we're just so grateful to be part of that landscape here in Nashville.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I visited Nashville before my early 20s, I think I spent a summer here, and I would try and find a church. It was different because this is not Canada. This is not Australia.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you found it the same in Australia, but if you're in, you're in, and if you're out, like you're all out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here there's a little bit more of a gray area.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that we found quite different moving to Nashville. Australia, for the most part, is a very unchurched nation. It's only a few percent of people would go to church in Australia, and so it's one of those things. If you called yourself a Christian in Australia, you had to live that. Otherwise, the non-believers around you would remind you, hey, you call yourself a Christian, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where what we found interesting here in Nashville, it was like everywhere we went, we just found people that went to church. And so we were like, God, why did you send us to Nashville? Everybody's already saved. That's kind of what it felt like. And not to say that, there aren't a lot of people here that really do have a very genuine faith in God. Mm-hmm. But I think, just the cultural side of Christianity, seeing people come out of what they've just lived in their whole life because, that's what they did or that's what you do in the South. I think seeing people really fall in love with Jesus and have a personal awakening to him in their lives, I think has been one of the real beautiful things about being here.
Yeah, I think what I love about the belonging and is even just how prophetic the name is, and as an outsider coming here, moving from a new country, I truly do feel like I belong.
Yeah,
and it's to the point that if I'm working in the city or at the studio on Tuesday night, and it's 6:30, 7 o'clock, I might just call my wife and go, I think I'm just gonna go to church tonight just by myself.
Yeah.
And I've never gone and sat alone.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It's amazing. Well, and we, obviously that doesn't happen by accident. We want to be really intentional about that. And, hopefully that's been most people's experience. I'm sure not everyone has necessarily felt that for whatever reason, but it is one thing that we really, we want to be intentional with our team and our leaders, our staff about, just engaging with people. People aren't a commodity. The whole reason we exist as a church is to build community and to point people to Jesus. And so, we want to absolutely do our best to make people feel that. And the reality is, as much as we want them to feel like they belong in our church, the bigger picture is that they're not belonging to us. They're not belonging to an organization. They're not belonging to a church name. We belong to Jesus. And that's actually where we find our sense of belonging.
I had a pastor tell me one time, I think this is true of churches, volunteers, musicians, bandmates, record label partnerships, whatever that looks like in both the church world or in the music industry side of things, that we get to shepherd people until God says it's someone else's turn.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you kind of look at it that way, you can never be offended.
No, that's right.
When someone leaves, because you go, no, God said it was someone else's turn to shepherd them.
Yeah.
They may think it was their decision.
Yeah.
But it was ultimately bigger than us.
And that's the thing, at some point, we were being shepherded by someone else. We've got people in our congregation that at some point were being shepherded somewhere else, and God's brought them to our house for a season. However, obviously we pray that season's a long season. But,
of course.
We've had people in our church that have only been in Nashville for 6 months, and the 6 months with us, completely impacted their life, and now they're living in another part of the country or the world and doing great things for God. But we just want to pour out as much as we can in whatever time we have people with us. Yeah,
that's awesome. And the story and the heart of how you arrived here in Nashville is, it's why I love doing this podcast, because I think there's a lot you can learn about 15-year-old so-and-so and 18-year-old so-and-so and 25-year-old so-and-so that impacts who they are today.
Yeah.
And I want to play a little something, because I want to take you back to 9th grade.
Wow.
In Canada, and MSN Messenger. Do you remember MSN Messenger?
Man.
Like AIM or like AOL Messenger, all that stuff. And a buddy of mine, I apologize, it probably was illegal. He sent me this MP3. He says, you got to hear this song. And we need our youth worship to sound like this. And I just want to know what goes through your head when you hear this.
Yeah, well, we're going back a long way right now. A long way.
That's some hip hop.
I mean, it's a sound. It is a sound.
I love it.
I'm not totally sure what that sound is, but it's a sound. It was it was actually a very significant time in our lives.
Yeah.
and it was one of the first, energetic kind of up songs that I think I'd ever written in my life.
Yeah.
So it was, in fact, when I did the demo for that song, this is how long ago it was. I showed our team from a cassette. That's how long
Nice.
I recorded
Amazing.
it to a cassette. So,
Well, I think it's so interesting because it was such a unique sound,
Yeah.
and it was highly influential for me because you're looking at these movements happening in other parts of the world, and you're looking in Canada going, why can't God do the same thing here?
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to sound like a fan, but I have to say that like it's not that at all. More so that it was hugely influential, especially the record that you released and were part of with Planetshakers called "Open Up the Gates."
Yeah.
That like it takes me right back to high school and leading those songs in youth
That's
ministry, and those songs made their way to Canada.
Yeah.
But what I thought was really cool about it was you were producing it as well.
Yeah. And that was, I guess when I got saved, which was, I came into a youth ministry when I was 16, which was run by Pastor Russell, who, was the guy that started Planetshakers. And this is before Planetshakers began. And I spent 2.5 years in his youth ministry, in fact, involved in it really before I want to say I got on, set on fire for Jesus.
Yeah.
I was still living my own thing, but a few weeks before I was 19, I had a really radical encounter with God. And from that moment, it was like I just said, God, whatever you want from my life, it's yours.
It's dangerous.
And so it is dangerous. But, I came on staff a year later, but even then, we just had there was no parameters. There was no, we had no guidebook, no playbook to look to, especially in Australia. Like at that time, the only church that I knew of that even had, worship people on staff was Hillsong Church in Sydney.
Right.
And, we were part of a large church in Adelaide at the time. And, I think we had one guy that oversaw the whole, church worship, but I didn't know of a single person in the youth area in any church that was getting paid to be a creative.
Right.
And so when I came on staff, Pastor Russell was just like, 2 years into it, he was like, I've got this vision to do this conference. Really what started out for our own personal youth ministry or our own local church youth ministry the first year, but we pretty quickly began to see that God wanted to do something bigger than that, but none of us had any idea. And so we were just like, let's just go, we'll just figure it out along the way. And so even when we started releasing music, it wasn't because we had some grandmaster plan of, trying to take over the world. It really was, hey, this is what God's doing in our youth conference right now with our young people. Let's just hit record and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so, we were writing these songs that were just really just a soundtrack. They were just the voice to what God was doing in our midst.
Along the way.
Yeah. And I'd never heard something like we wrote with Shake the Planet. I'd never really heard some kind of, rock / hip hop / bunch of white kids in Australia doing something that, we had no parameters for. And so I think just jumping into that and trying to figure that stuff out and not even really having anyone that we knew, studio or engineer wise that had their head around this stuff. So I was just learning everything that I could from people. And so, when we did the Open Up the Gates record, I basically set up a studio in my house, and I'd only worked on maybe 2 records before that. But, we built this drum room in my garage, and, I wrote and played almost everything on that whole album. I think I even played drums on a couple of songs. And it was just like this huge experiment just to put voice to, these songs that God was giving us.
Open up the gates and let the King of Glory in. Fill this house with praises as we lift our hands and worship you.
I think it was a wild realization to think back and think, man, I'm sitting there in my basement of my house trying to figure this stuff out, and yet God, in His kindness, would take these songs and just put them wherever He needed them to go. And it's been a long time of just doing that same thing.
Well, it's funny because, and again, I bring this into context because I feel like there's a lot of people listening to this podcast that can find themselves in this story and listening to music, but being a teenager in high school, not only listening to these songs to want to lead in my church, but finding out that my dad's best friend put a studio in his basement.
Yeah.
And put Pro Tools in there and said, have at her whenever you want. He had like Avalon 737s and Royer mics and like great setup, floating floors, everything.
Yeah.
And at 17, I said, I'm just going to figure out how to use this.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to even that album, and it's so funny you say that you'd only done a couple before that, because it sounds, and it's mixed and sounds so good.
Yeah.
For you just figuring things out.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about just figuring it out.
Yeah.
Just going and doing it.
Yeah. And I think that was the thing for me. Like it's that age-old thing of, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
Of like, when you don't know, you just go and figure out how it needs to be done or a better way to do it. And so there was a lot of things that I look back and I'm like, man, if I'd been in a town like Nashville, 20 years ago or whenever that was, it probably would have been a different situation. But I think God was intentional in like, hey, I'm going to let you figure some of this stuff out on your own, because you're going to get to do it a different way and pave a new pathway. And I feel like that's, for Alex and I, that's really been something that we've just found has been a recurring theme in our lives. God's like, hey, I'm just going to send you somewhere with not a whole lot of signposts, but I'm going to put something in you that says, you know what, we're going to just pioneer. We're going to get in there and figure out how to do this.
Well, and I look at it this way too. If you had a big church building here in Nashville, which I know we're moving towards, which is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
But I look at and for those of you who don't know what the church is like, we meet at Rocketown, and there's just all these parking lots, like not big parking lots, like mini parking lots everywhere, like convenient 7-Eleven size parking lots. And we have this massive army of parking team that make it so easy for people to find a parking space, get inside, and it's the first point of contact. If you had this big, beautiful, laid out parking lot, those people wouldn't get to serve.
Yeah, that's right.
You wouldn't get to have that first connection where somebody feels welcome right away.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how like the dilemma led to actually something beautiful being created out of it.
Yeah. People have said to us, even in this season right now, obviously we are, as a church, we purchased a building and we're working towards having that finished up, hopefully within the next 6 to 8 months. But people have often said to me that they're like, you must be so excited to be able to get in a venue and not have to do bump in and bump out. And I'm like, maybe. I mean, I am, absolutely. We're so excited about it. And yet there's something so amazing about being in a season where you are having to load in and out, and you are having to do all this stuff, because what you're actually doing is helping build community. And so much of the community that we have, even in our worship team, our production teams, is because people have just been there early, staying late, hanging, setting up together and getting to know each other. And it's I think if there's one thing that I always want to be mindful in our church, is to always be giving people an opportunity to serve, because it's not, I've seen some places where that's been maybe a little overdone and people can get burnt out. But I think if you can do that right, that's actually such an important part of the community aspect, because when you've got the same heart and the same end goal and you get to do it together, and then you all get to be part of the win, seeing people get saved, or seeing, people encounter God like we do, and, all these sorts of things. It's not just Alex and I. It's not even just our staff. It really is. I mean, we have almost 1,000 volunteers serve in the life of our church.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm thankful for every one of them, because that's their part of building community.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about sort of why the common question you find when people move to Nashville is, why are you here? And usually they say, we're not sure yet.
That is definitely a common theme here in this town. And
I write a book on that.
I'm still trying to work out for most people whether they know, but they don't want to speak it out loud in case it doesn't come to pass. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of insecurity in it. Or if they're like us, where you just really didn't know. Like when we had obviously been in Australia our whole lives, and had been involved in that ministry for a very long time, until it was really kind of 2010, 2011, God really began to stir our hearts about moving to the States. And it was a bit of a dichotomy for me, because we actually didn't want to leave Melbourne. We love, Melbourne's an incredible, at that point we're in Melbourne, and just an incredible city. Love everything about it, the food, the lifestyle, and God, starts stirring our hearts about going to Nashville. And, Nashville's cool, but 7 years ago,
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
It's changed a lot. I'm just going to say that. And so
both in culture and real estate prices.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's and like weekend stuff now. I just heard the other day it's the most expensive city in the whole of the US for a hotel weekend rate right
Insane.
now. So, side note. But God really started stirring our hearts about moving, and with that we were like, God, you need to give us a plan, show us what we're going to do. And He was like, that's awesome, but I can't. You just need to trust me. And at that point, I had been a worship pastor, a creative director, at that point, a producer and an engineer for a long time. There was no desire in me to move to another country and plant a church, especially in a city like Nashville, where there were already, literally almost more churches per head than anywhere else in the States.
Let me ask you this. I'm curious.
Yeah.
When you started talking about feeling like Nashville is on your heart, was there misunderstanding of the motives because of the history surrounding music and worship?
Yes. Yeah.
How'd you deal with that?
I think in those moments, you really got to learn how to just let God take care of that stuff and vindicate. Not that there needs to be vindication, but kind of make give people
make your heart come through.
Yeah, because I think if there had been. And it's not to say that we weren't supported. There were definitely people around us that were like, God's in this.
Right.
And, we walked that journey with our pastors. And that was awesome. They released us. But even then, I think when you've built something quite significant together, it's hard to say, you know what, these people are going to move on from here. Mm-hmm. And they've been a big part of this. But what God has for them in their future doesn't look like what we have in our future. And so that can be, there's always going to be something that you got to figure out and walk through in that moment. And I think there was a season where we realized we actually had to figure out in our hearts, are we doing this because it's a good idea from other people, or are we doing this because it's what God's got for us? Mm. And when He strips all the other opinions away, all the other encouragement away, you quickly find out, in that place in your heart of like, all right, God, is this you or is this not? And if it's you, we're just going to, ignore the noise and, not ignore wisdom, but we're going to see how you've been moving in this. And the reality was, for a good 2 years leading up to that point, and some people have varying opinions about prophetic and understandings and all that sort of stuff. But for a good 2 years leading up to that time, almost every time Alex or I were away traveling, somebody that we didn't know, who had no way of even having any knowledge of our thought process about moving, somebody would come up and say, I had a dream about you, or God woke me up the other day, or I was sitting in church and your screen, your face came up on the screen promoting this week, and in the moment God gave me a word for you, and I can't tell you how many times it was confirmed that we were going to end up in the States. And so, for us, when we went to up and sat with our pastors and just said, God's in, He's been showing that He's in this, but we still want to find the most impossible thing that we can do. So if He does it, we'll just know. Right. And so what most Americans don't know is that every year the U.S. government holds what they call the diversity visa lottery, aka the green card lottery. Right. And it really, it's a lottery. It's like, if you win that, it's a life change, So the year that we applied for that, it was 14 million people applied. They only opened 700 entries to Australians out of that 14 million. And then even when they drew the lottery, we didn't get selected. And then a few days later, they emailed us and said, hey, we've messed up the whole lottery. We're going to cancel it and redraw it in 3 months' time. And then we got selected in the redraw. And so it was this, just this crazy, crazy time of going, God, we prayed for this. And you shut this thing down because it's not an accident. You were actually like, I'm going to, not to say that He did all of that just for us, but He definitely used all of that to show us I'm in this. And so we literally just came to Nashville actually saying to people, we don't know why we're here, but we just know that God sent us. And so, we just, all I had, we sold almost everything we owned in Australia except our studio gear. And I set up shop in the basement of our house and just started mixing records for people. And it really was through that we started meeting all these, creatives, artists, worship leaders, producers, musicians that spent a lot of their time touring.
Yeah.
And for most of them, they're gone almost every weekend. And so even though there's a ton of amazing churches here in Nashville, almost every church meets at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning or 9 and 11 on a Sunday morning. And so a lot of these people just didn't have, a local home church community that they could go to church with their family every week. And so after about 6 months of just hearing story after story after story, and for Alex and I, having been in ministry positions for over 20 years and a lot poured into us, we were just naturally pouring into the people around us.
Yeah, it's like sheep without a shepherd.
Yeah. And so, we one day we're praying, obviously praying a lot, but one day just really felt, this real thing, this real burden in our hearts for these people. And I remember just saying, God, someone needs to do something about this. And just feeling that, that gentle smile from heaven of like,
yeah, it's
and
you.
now you're starting to see. And I was so resistant. I was like, not me. I'm a crazy creative as well. I don't want to be pastoring more people like me, all that sort of stuff. But realizing, that was part of God's plan. And so we just started opening up our home on a Tuesday night and invited a handful of friends, and it just grew and grew and grew from there. And within a year, we had 120 or 130 people meeting in our house every week. And we were still at that point denying what it was because we understood the responsibility of pastoring a church.
You can't be in it for a short haul.
Yeah, that's right. It's it really is. And that's how we saw it. And it's not just the commitment, but it is a big deal. I believe it's a big deal to shepherd people and help them grow closer to God and build community. And so we actually, right before we launched as a church, we actually got offered a position. I got offered a worship pastor position out in California with someone who's been a hero of mine my whole life. And we flew out there, and it was on paper, it was an incredible opportunity. Great church. And at that point, we didn't have a whole lot of money in the bank, and we were like, man, everything about this looks good. Plus, it's by the ocean. It's California, perfect weather, none of this crazy natural humidity. And, and then right in the last minute, just that sense of God saying, it looks good, but you're just going back to what you had. I want to do something new, and are you willing to trust me? Did you really move all this way to just go back into what you're doing, or are you going to trust me? And so we just took a step of faith and said yes, and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, so from 160 people jammed in your basement to meeting at Rocketown, and I was blessed to actually be at some of the first gatherings there, and we just finished conference at the municipal auditorium in town, and great music, great artists, and then you guys just released a new album. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's not normal for people who have booking agents and managers and record labels to serve. I wouldn't say it's not normal for them to serve. I would say it's not normal for them to borderline not want to be on tour to serve at church. And that's the culture that's been created. And I don't say it's a name drop, but I want to say this to give people context for who don't know. Worship leaders like Kari Jobe, Cody Carnes, Meredith Andrews, Ben Canelon, fellow Canadian. You got Mia, and just the other night Danny Goki was leading worship, and some guy from American Idol sang a song on Mother's Day.
Beckham.
Yeah, Clark Beckham. That's right. But I mean, there's just this hodgepodge of artists from all different backgrounds that are part of the team and serving. And my question for you is how do you manage that many personalities and that many artists?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just view everybody as people. We all, at the core of it, we all just need Jesus. We do. And some of us to varying degrees, in that situation. And so I think for us, there's I don't know, for me, I'm not someone that gets enamored by personality. I think I respect and I admire people, for who they are, and well-known people and not so well-known people. But, I love to just see what God's doing in somebody's life. And that to me is really exciting. And so I think for me, when I see someone that's well-known, I don't see them in a different light. I see the gift on their life and I see the opportunity, but I also have been around long enough and been in this world long enough to realize that with that sense of responsibility and that expectation, there is a huge burden on those people that usually is overlooked. How they're dealing with life on the inside and all that sort of stuff. And so that's what we found, especially in the early days in the basement, was we wound up with a lot of those people because everywhere else that they would go, people would be calling on them for their name and what they could carry and what they could do for them. And so we realized that, man, if that's what's happening everywhere else, then they need a safe place where they can actually just show up. And it's not about their stage name or their stage, situation. This is about their heart.
Well, anywhere else. I mean, I used to say in Canada, like when we were doing young adults in Canada, all I had to do was throw an Instagram post out on Monday that Martin Smith was leading worship Sunday night, and the place would be packed.
Yeah, that's right.
And you could do that every Sunday.
Yeah.
And you don't know who you're getting. And the funny thing is, there's people who lead worship there who hold influence in worlds that are outside the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
Writers for Jonas Brothers and indie pop artists.
Yeah, and we've got film and TV. Like some of our worship leaders, probably most of our church wouldn't even realize that, they're up there leading worship. But you're hearing their songs on, TV commercials and some of the biggest, up and coming shows.
Football
and all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
all
this
stuff.
massive stuff. But that's just their world of influence, and it's honestly what we believe that the church at large should be. We should be able to come together as a body and it's not about the name or the face on the stage. When we come together, we come together for one reason. That's to lift up the name of Jesus. That's the whole reason that we're there. And that's the conversation that we've had, with our team. That's the heartbeat behind our team. And so we absolutely celebrate who they are and what they do in their, circles outside of church. But when we come together for church, we all of us, Alex and I, we leave those things at the door in the sense of, whatever we need to do to get people's eyes on Jesus, that's why we're here. And that I think really has been the heartbeat of our house.
And everybody walks in the same entrance.
Yeah.
And everyone checks their kids in the kids ministry in the same lineup.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I just think that that's so powerful.
Yeah.
And what is it that, when it comes to artists, is there a temptation that you ever fight to start? I want to say using's the wrong word, but where you start to go, oh no, they are this person before they're the worship leader. Like how do you separate sort of the gift from the person in a daily walk? What are some ways that plays itself out?
Yeah, I think again, I believe everybody in life has a gift. Some people's gift is going to bring them, before a handful of people. Other people's gift's going to take them, on a world stage.
That's good.
But at the end of the day, it's still a gift from God. So our gift is not our own. It's just ours to steward from God. And the reality is he could take it away and give it to someone else tomorrow if he wanted to, which is not how he operates with us. He actually gives us gifts because he wants to see how we can steward them for his sake. But at the end of the day, we're not dealing with people's gifts. We're dealing with people's heart. And they're the conversations that we're constantly having with people of like, let's take the opportunities out of this. Let's take the notoriety out of this. Let's just deal with what's going on in your life right now. Because if we can't get that stuff figured out, we've talked about this quite a bit, I guess, internally, but, the whole integrity versus anointing. We look at people's lives and we see the anointing on their life and we think, well, that's what makes the person. But actually the anointing is the gift from God. The opportunity is the gift from God. But it's our integrity that actually gives the foundation for that anointing to rest on. And if the anointing exceeds the integrity, then at some point the foundation's going to crack and crumble and, everything you have is going to fall to the ground. And so that's the stuff that we are really, we really with our team focus on, what's your life like, the character, the integrity of your life. We don't have people on our stage because they're gifted. We have people on our stage because they actually carry something, because their life is not perfect, but their life is at a level of maturity in Jesus. And so we have some incredibly gifted people in our church, but they're still on a journey. And so at some point they might be on the stage or not. And, the reality is Clark, who was singing at Mother's Day. Incredibly gifted person, and we asked him to serve in the parking lot when he first came to church. And he was like, whatever you need from me, So he serves in kids, he serves in the prayer team, parking lot, and then he'll get on the stage as well sometimes. Danny Goki was the same way. He was like, actually, I spent my whole life on stage. I would love to serve in another area in the church. And so for the first 2 years, Danny Goki would be out there with a parking stick, directing people, and through that, having the opportunity to minister to people in the parking lot, just one-on-one, I think that's the thing. We've really tried to take the stigma out of this thing that the stage is a big deal, that gifting is a big deal, that opportunity is the big deal. Really, your heart is the big deal, and that's what we want to get to.
It's talent will without character. That's been my prayer lately, and it going like. Even this year, I shared about on one of our previous episodes, but just taking the summer off to going, God, give me the character that would allow me to carry greater anointing, because God will not be mocked.
No, He won't,
and He will not allow. And He's actually so graceful with us that He often doesn't give us platforms and stages that we're not ready to steward well.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome. And one of the things I really appreciate, and it's kind of where we're gonna close off, is you guys released a new album recently called On Wonder. I'm getting that right.
That's correct.
Okay, I should know that.
You're a good man.
I got great notes here apparently. And before that, you guys had released a previous record as well, and I was talking to Andrew Holt, who's the worship pastor, about this, and he said something really interesting. He goes, I believe every church should aim to write music for their house. Yeah. But he said, I don't know if every church is called to make an album.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so profound and simple.
Yeah.
And what made you guys go, I think this is not the logical next step in the advancement of our name, but this is the logical next step for our house.
That's it's been an interesting journey. Obviously, coming from a church back in Australia where I think I produced maybe 20 records by the time I'd left, and they've done a ton more since then. But I've also been involved in a lot of different worship records and different worship movements over the years. So even when we started meeting together in the basement, I just very early on, second or third time we gathered, I just felt this gentle nudge from the Holy Spirit just saying, be prepared. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, you figure that out, just be prepared. Wow. And so we just started recording every week from all the way back in the basement. And at some point I probably should go through and that's a whole other story. We might release a, Basement Days worship collection or something. Who knows,
man? Oh, man, a living room album?
Yeah. We've got it all there. But, when we first started as a church, people were like, so when are you going to do an album? And I'm like, listen, that's not even on the cards. That's not on the table at all. We're just going to love God, and we're just going to keep pressing into God, and we're going to see, what God begins to speak to us about as a community, and then do our best, if the opportunity arises, do our best to just put voice to that. Part of my hesitation, honestly, was the fact that here in Nashville, especially in the early days, a good portion of our church, that's what they did for a job. Their job, is day in, day out, write songs and go through, and amazing songs, and part of some significant worship movements around the country with their songwriting. And so I was a little hesitant to come into this and just say, hey, let's do what everyone else is doing already. But then it became apparent really just through our worship moments in church that these songs would just begin to flow out. And so, on the first record, there's a song called Greater Than All, and the chorus of it was just something I started singing at the end of a ministry time at church. And we had that chorus that I thought was a bridge, and we would just, every now and then, we just go back into it and sing it, and it became a bit of a thing. And, then we moved on to other things. And then when I realized we had enough songs, or close to enough songs for a record, God was like, this is what you need to build on is the moments that came from church. So the Bridge of Fall, I'm pretty sure, came from a moment in church. You know, all these songs actually came from moments in church that we just then took and gave some framework to. And so it really has been just the overflow of what God's doing in our house, and even down to recording them. You know, both the albums so far have been recorded over 3 or 4 different nights, you know, throughout the year at different events or different, you know, worship nights at church, because I just don't like, I don't love the idea of saying, hey, we've got all these songs, let's try and manufacture some really great worship moments all in one night so it all looks perfect on camera.
Have a lot of pressure on everyone. Get it right.
Like nobody's working at their best. Well, some people will, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not at my best in that, you know. And so even, you know, this last record, when we started mixing, people were like, so when are we going to start recording for the album? And we're like, oh, we're already mixing. You know, like people didn't even know that we had been, because we just want this to be an overflow of what God's doing. And so it's just not been a pressure thing at all. We're not trying to build this thing of, you know, not to say that we wouldn't ever tour. We may, and we have done a few dates out on the road, but we're not trying to build the Belonging Co. as a worship band, you know, to be the next such and such. We really are. It's just an extension of what God's doing in our house here in Nashville.
And the reality is too, you've got to wear many hats.
Yeah.
As you know, not only the guy kind of producing, leading this, you know, the worship movement, but there's so many other pastoral hats. Yeah. And then there's the dad hat.
There is.
And the husband hat. And then there's like your personal time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you add touring and you add all those things to it. Actually, I kind of thought about this today. It's like burnout happens when you focus your energy and time on things God hasn't graced you to do.
Absolutely.
Because, God will always give you the strength.
Yeah.
You'll always feel overwhelmed, but he'll always give you the strength and won't ever destroy you. But when you feel destroyed, that's usually when you're doing too much. I want to talk a little bit about the album. The album's called On Wonder. There are incredible worship leaders featured on there. Kari Jobe, Natalie Grant, Cody Carnes, Meredith Andrews is on there, and then Daniella Mason, who's more in the pop scene. Yeah, who just I love her voice.
She is incredible
and so anointed.
Yeah,
and it's funny because you'll listen to their music outside of this and go, oh gosh, I didn't know like that was on their life too.
Yeah. She's a beast. She's awesome.
And then like, you know, and then they're the ones that just made the album. Like the other worship leaders, like Danny Goki, Ben Canelon, Mia Fields, that aren't even on there, and part of the community. So it's an amazing, amazing album. Just tell me a little bit about why On Wonder is special to you guys as a church and to you personally.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's special to us, mostly because these really are the songs of our house that, you know, over the last year or 18 months, they've been the songs that our church has, you know, consistently come back to. They've been the songs that I know for me personally, so many of them have been moments that I've encountered God as we've worshiped together in church. And, you know, and I think they are, you know, there's this beautiful sense of you know, creative and musical diversity in it, where it's not just kind of one sound through the whole album. It's one of the things that I love about, you know, what God's doing in our house, and that it's not just a representation of the 9 or 10 worship leaders that are on this record. And this is what I said to our team even on the launch night. I was like, this, you know, they may have been the ones on the field, you know, for the winning goal.
Yeah.
But it's a culmination of the entire team together, and that's hundreds of us here, you know, in our house. And so I love that there's a real sense of, you know, we're just in this together. And whoever just happens to have a mic in their hand, or whoever was happening to lead when God was moving in a moment, that's cool. We're all here to support that and be part of that.
Yeah, you're not like a coach looking at the roster board and go, okay, we're going to put Cody Carnes at left field and Kari
really
at
not
center.
That at all. And people are like, you know, always trying to figure out the plan with it, and, you know, people from outside, and how did you do this, and why did you do this? And I'm like, it's really not that complicated. I'm not that much of a complicated person. I'm like, like, let's just see where God's moving and roll with it. And so that's why, there's different worship leaders on this album to what there were on the first.
Yeah.
And the next will be the same, because this is just continually evolving and growing and expanding. And, and hopefully there'll be even some different things that we're able to do alongside of it along the way. But I love the heartbeat of these songs. And there's a lot of very personal moments, I think, that people have invested their heart and their experience in these songs. And also, being able to just declare some things over people's lives. We believe in God for breakthrough in people's lives, and that sort of stuff. And so, I don't know. I love it. I love what God's doing in our team. I'm a little bit in awe of our team, to be honest. So
yeah, He's certainly doing something special, and I'm really just grateful for the church and the movement and the songs. I just want to ask you, just as we close this, because we do get a lot of young musicians and young people who want to hear from artists that they look up to. What would you say to the young worship pastor or the young worship leader right now who's going, oh, I want to create an album like that, and then maybe we can tour it, and then what would you say to the person who's trying to figure out, who has dreams?
Yeah. I think we all have dreams. I think God, more than anything else, God loves His church. And that is the thing that I believe is His delivery mechanism of His presence to this world. And so if I could encourage you with anything, I believe faithfulness in the house of God is the foundation for God to do significant things in your life, because in the house of God is where, you get tested, you get tried, you get, you find patience, you get expanded in your character, you get expanded in your gift set. You also get expanded through being asked to do things that you really don't want to do, but that's where God actually expands you. There's so many things that, have become such big wins in my life that started out from moments where I was like, I don't feel like I'm ready for this, or I don't feel like I'm equipped for this, or I'm not gifted enough for this. But because I was just willing to say yes and be faithful and obedient in those moments, I believe God has just, kept opening up things for us to be part of, because He's realized we've not made it about ourselves. It's not this end goal of how do we make ourselves look good. It really is, how do we just be part of God's kingdom here on earth? And so I would really encourage you, if you're, wherever you're at, if you've been in church for a year or you've been in church for 20 years, God always rewards faithfulness. He always does. And sometimes it doesn't come in the rewards that we're looking for, but it always comes in what's right from Him. And so let me just stir you to just don't grow weary in doing good and being faithful, and keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, and just realize you're not in competition with anyone else. I think this is where a lot of people, you kind of mentioned burnout before, but I think this is where a lot of people, they struggle to switch off because they're always feeling like, I've got to do more to look like this, or more to sound like that, or our ministry needs to have this or that, and realize that, sometimes we can be so busy thinking that we're doing stuff for the kingdom, but sometimes it's actually just stuff for ourselves. And not that there's anything wrong with doing some things along the way for yourself, but if the driving force of that is out of insecurity, then that is going to lead you to burnout. And so we, even with our staff in this season, we give our staff Friday and Saturday off. I haven't met many other churches, or been in many other churches where their team actually takes 2 days off, but I just believe, our team should have a weekend. Yeah. And so when we show up on Sunday, our team's rested. And I've said to our team, if there are things that, we want to do, the reality is there's always going to be more vision than there is resource, and that's okay. We don't have to put into play everything that we have vision for in the moment. Yeah. It's important to be able to acknowledge, this is maybe something for the future, but if we're going to burn out our resource, there won't be a future. So let's just get that stuff figured out. So,
man, it's good. There's a few quotable things there that we're definitely going to be posting on social media, and I want to encourage you to make sure to follow the Belonging Co. I believe it's TB Co Worship on Instagram.
Yeah,
and the church is the Belonging Co. Belonging Co on Instagram. Yeah. And if you're visiting Nashville, come visit us on a Sunday,
or a Tuesday night,
or on a Tuesday night. So Tuesday nights at 7:30. Yep. Rocketown. Sundays 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 4 p.m.
Yes.
And definitely do that if you if you want to say hi to me, I'll be at the 11 a.m. service. We are 11 a.m. faithfuls usually. So, but hey, we're going to close this podcast as we always do with the song. And so we are going to take a listen to Smoke and Mirrors off the latest album, Awe and Wonder, from The Belonging Co. This is Josh McCabe here with Henry Seeley. Thanks so much for hanging out.
Thanks for letting me be here.
I appreciate it, man. Well, this is Smoke and Mirrors, The Belonging Co. Worship. Check it out.
All right, there you have it. There's my conversation with Henry Seeley, The Belonging Co., Nashville, Tennessee. Their new album is called Awe and Wonder. You can get it everywhere now. Their record before that is called All the Earth. Equally as good. You'll really enjoy it. Make sure to go check that out. We also have a playlist featuring a lot of the songs we talked about in this episode, so make sure that you click the link in the show notes for that. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, my name is Josh McCabe. I am the host of Overflow Beyond the Music. We will see you again real soon.